It is Packers-Lions game day. Welcome in, everybody, to this brand new edition of the Pack-A-Day podcast. For those of you who are new, my name is Andy Herman. You can always follow me on Twitter at Andy Herman NFL. You can always follow the podcast at Pack-A-Day Podcast. Appreciate you taking some time out of your day to join me here to talk Packers-Lions. As always, I'm going to be going over my three keys to the game. I'll go over my prediction, some of the injury report, as well as some of the transactions from Saturday. So a lot I want to get into today. And let's kick things off right away with talking over some of the Saturday transactions. Certainly this season, this has been a big day of movement on Saturdays with, players moving up and down the practice squad, potentially going on IR, COVID list, COVID replacements, and so on and so forth. So this was certainly no different. Both the Lions and the Packers made moves on Saturday. Let's start with Green Bay. First of all, they get A.J. Dillon back off the COVID list. This was an expected move, but one that you just love to see. And I know he's the number 3 running back, and I know he's well behind Aaron Jones and Jamal Williams on that depth chart right now. But with Tyler Ervin being out, it's really nice to have that third running back because for all that Tavon Austin can do and some of the same things that Tyler Ervin does, you're probably not going to play Tavon too much as a pure running back. You could give it to him on a handoff or a toss, a couple times a game if you wanted to, but we certainly know that he's not a true running back. So to have a guy in there like A.J. Dillon that can give you that depth and be that number 3 running back, I think that's a big win for the Packers, and you just love to see him back and healthy. Dominique Daphne also added to the full 53-man active roster, called up from the practice squad. He provides some depth at that tight end and H-back position, which they really needed going into this game. I noted on Twitter, the Packers haven't really been banged up at one position simultaneously. We've seen some injuries all throughout the team. The offensive line has had certainly their fair share of injuries, but for the most part, they haven't had one group really get hit hard, knock on wood, right? But the tight end group / H-back group right now is for the first time is one of those groups that's hit pretty hard. We know Josiah DeGuara is out for the year. John Lovett's out for the year. Now Jay Sternberger is out this week with a concussion. So they're really low at that tight end and certainly at that H-back / fullback type position. They still have, Mercedes Lewis and Robert Tonyan at tight end, but no depth behind that. And then nobody to play that fullback H-back role. Insert Dominique Daphne into that role. He played a handful of snaps a week ago, and he will take that role, and we'll see what he's able to do with it. Has a very similar career arc to Robert Tonyan, same college, used to be a receiver, everything like that. So hopefully he can have that same sort of career arc in Green Bay. Only time will tell. He's a unique player. Can give them that depth at tight end. Plus, I would expect him to be the primary H-back fullback in this game. And I would expect him to get a ton of time on special teams because Lewis and Tonyan probably aren't going to play a ton there, no pun intended. But Daphne's going to need to play some serious snaps on special teams. And he's probably going to get, somewhere around 10 to 12 snaps. It wouldn't shock me if he got that many snaps in this game in that fullback, H-back, and maybe even as a third tight end. So, he could definitely see an increase in snaps being called up to the active roster, certainly with the injuries that are in place right now. 2 other call-ups. These were practice squad call-ups just for this game. Those were both Juwan Winfree and Ben Braden. Winfree will likely be a replacement for Malik Taylor would be my guess. We'll see what comes of that. I'll kind of go over my injuries in just a moment. But Ben Braden, I think it's really interesting to talk about Braden. I think there's a real shot that he could be the 7th offensive lineman in this game. Hopefully we don't have to find out. But I think if, John Runyon Jr., assuming Rick Wagner's still the starter, which everyone expects at this point, John Runyon Jr. is likely the first person off the bench, and they can kind of mix and match dependent upon who would go out. But then after that, it's either Yash Nijman or Ben Braden. And I think just based on experience and where both are at in their career, I think you can make a strong argument that Ben Braden would be the next person off the bench. We'll see. Hopefully we don't see, but if that comes to fruition, we would see what direction they go in. But with having the ability to kick some of those different players like Elton Jenkins, Billy Turner, Rick Wagner, all those guys to play tackle, some of them, to be able to kick inside, dependent upon who gets hurt, it could matter. But I think Ben Braden might be the 7th offensive lineman in this game. So hopefully we don't find out, but that's definitely one where if depth is tested, we could see Ben Braden get in the game in that capacity. Green Bay also signed Isaac Nauta to the practice squad. That was an expected move. It was announced, or at least reported by numerous people on the Packers beat earlier this week. Blocking tight end from the Detroit Lions. They released him earlier this year. Again, we'll give the Packers some depth at tight end. They now have Dax Raymond as well as Isaac Nauta on the practice squad at that tight end position. And again, as I noted earlier, that's one of the positions that is pretty beat up at the moment, so they can use the depth, and that will certainly help on the practice squad. Again, more of a blocking tight end, not quite in the mold of like a Mercedes Lewis, but he would play that type of position and be more of a primary blocker than your receiving type tight end. All right, let's go over the injury reports for the Green Bay Packers. Simon Stepaniak and Jay Sternberger both ruled out for this game. So I already mentioned Sternberger. Simon Stepaniak, he was kind of a pleasant surprise that he was already activated and is, quote unquote, healthy enough to be activated. But Green Bay obviously is going to ease him in. He practiced in limited fashion all week, but they don't want to press him into any sort of offensive line duty at this point, which I think makes sense. So he's out this week and will not be active. Doubtful, in my opinion, he's listed as, there's 3 players listed as questionable, but what I would say is doubtful is Malik Taylor. He did not practice on Friday, and I think if you pair that with the Juwan Winfrey being called up to the active roster, you got to expect at least one of the receivers is probably not going to be active. Otherwise, they'd have no need to call Winfrey up. And with Malik Taylor, being not practicing on Friday, I think you can kind of read the tea leaves and put the puzzle pieces together. So I'd expect Malik Taylor to be out in this game. Darnell Savage, I think, is the real questionable one. He was fine all week, then he had a groin injury flare up on Friday. He practiced in a limited capacity, and I think that's really your coin flip in this one as to whether or not he plays. If he's hurt, I would expect Green Bay to be cautious if there's any chance of aggravating it or anything like that. Hopefully he's able to go, especially with Raven Green being out. That could really tax that the safety and hybrid safety linebacker group. That would mean Will Redmond would almost assuredly have to play safety next to Adrian Amos, which means he wouldn't be able to play that box safety. Now you're going to maybe a Vernon Scott, a Henry Black, and it just kind of bumps the pieces down a little bit. So Darnell Savage is playing good football as of late, and hopefully he's able to go and it's not too serious of an injury. And then I think what I would call probable, even though, again, he's listed as questionable, Equanimeous St. Brown. He practiced in full on Friday, and usually that's a good sign that they're going to be able to play. Not always. He's listed as questionable on the injury list, but if I were a betting man, I would expect Equanimeous St. Brown to likely be active in this game. For the Detroit Lions, the first big piece of news for them is Everson Griffin went on the COVID-19 list, which is notable for a variety of different reasons. One, he's a damn good football player that will not be available against the Packers. But two, it was confirmed that he tested positive for COVID. So you never really want to see, going to a game and against an opponent where they had a positive test the day before you play them. Hopefully it's nothing. Hopefully it's a one-off for Detroit, and hopefully Everson Griffin is fine and healthy. I'm certainly wishing the best for him. It can be very scary. So that's 1A. But looking at this from a pure football standpoint, Detroit will certainly miss him along the line. And again, for the Packers, you just hope that nobody else is contagious, and it could be something that ravishes the Packers. They have a game on Saturday next week, remember, against the Panthers. So any positive tests Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday could heavily impact that game. So I know I'm getting about 10 spots ahead of myself there, but hopefully it's much ado about nothing, and it's just a one-off for the Lions. Jeff Okudah, Kenny Golladay, and Tyrell Crosby all out for this game. That's 3 starters for the Lions. Jeff Okudah at corner, of course, Golladay at wide receiver, and then Tyrell Crosby at their starting right tackle position. So those are 3 big losses. They had a variety of different questionable players, including DeAndre Swift and Matthew Stafford, but both are expected to play. The other ones weren't certainly as consequential as the 3 that I mentioned with Crosby, Golladay, and Okudah. All right, let me go over my 3 keys to this game. First of all, number 1A is you have to avoid a slow start against the Lions. And you might say, well, Andy, that's a cop-out, right? You can't have slow starts in any game. If you go down, 14-0, or you just don't start off great against a team, that can be a recipe for disaster against anyone. And sure, that's absolutely the case. But the point being here, the Packers have got down in double digits in their last 7 games against the Lions. Earlier this year, they were down 14-3. Going back to last year, they were down 13-0 and 17-3 before coming back to winning those games, both at the buzzer with Mason Crosby field goals. They lost 31-0 in the last game of 2018. They were down 24-0 in the previous game in 2018. They lost 35-11 the game before that, and they were down 20-3 the game before that. So in their last 7 games, they've been down in double digits to the Lions in all of them. So hopefully that is a trend that can stop on Sunday. Granted, they did win, I think, actually more than half of those games. So it's not it's not a be-all, end-all if they get down double digits where it's just over and the Lions win, but you'd still like to see that come to an end. Devontae Adams made mention of it this week. Matt LaFleur made mention of it this week. They're well aware of their slow starts against Detroit, especially in Detroit. And you got to hope that they come out strong and don't let that happen again, because, again, anytime you have a double-digit deficit against a team or come out slow, it can be a recipe for a disaster, especially against a team like the Lions, where they just fired their coach a couple weeks ago. They're probably not really fighting too much for a playoff spot at this time, and you just want to take care of business, get in, get out, and start getting ready for Carolina. Number 2 on my list, control the running backs, Adrian Peterson and Deandre Swift. All right, so first of all, let's take a look at this. Adrian Peterson, in his career against Green Bay, 414 carries, 2,115 yards, 17 touchdowns, a 5.1 yards per carry, and he has scored in 15 of his last 19 games. So Adrian Peterson is a Packers killer, and I think most of you probably know that, but those stats are still fairly jarring. Again, when you score 15 times in his last 19 games, that's through different teams. That's Minnesota, that's Washington, that's Detroit. That's crazy. And you might say, well, yes, but Adrian Peterson in his prime is different than Adrian Peterson as of late. Even in his last 3 games, he scored 3 touchdowns in those 3 games and is averaging over 5.1 yards per carry in those 3 games. So, even recently in the Washington and Detroit days, he's still finding ways to be a pain in the Packers' ass. So, control Adrian Peterson no matter what you do. And then Deandre Swift, too. You go back to his game earlier this season, he only had 5 carries for 12 yards against the Packers. They did a nice job against them, but he had 5 catches for 60 yards in that game. And if you go back to the last 2 games that Deandre Swift played before getting hurt, he had 246 total yards of offense in those 2 games and was a real weapon both as a runner and as a pass catcher out of the backfield. So the running backs in this game are going to be key for Detroit, and Green Bay's got to do a great job. And if you start talking about running backs in the passing game, remember, you might be, or you are without Raven Green in this game, who is really one of those hybrid safety linebackers that's been used a ton on running backs running routes out of the backfield. So that could be a real difference in this game. So Green Bay's got to find a way to control both Deandre Swift and Adrian Peterson in this game. And then last but not least, control the line of scrimmage for the Packers offense. This Detroit defense is really, really bad, and it starts with their play up front. Trey Flowers, Julian Okwara, and Everson Griffin are all out for this game for injury reasons. They don't have a strong line. They have 3 defensive linemen who are questionable and missed practice this week. I'm expecting all of them to play, but still, are they even at 100%? And even if they all are, it's just a very weak defensive line that is not going to get a ton of pressure. You can control them in the running game. Detroit is terrible on defense, and if the Packers offensive line, which has been great all season, can control the trenches and win up front, it should set up both Aaron, Jones and Rodgers for a ton of success in this game, both through the ground and through the air, and really just set the Packers up for a win. I don't think Detroit has the horses up front to compete with the Packers on offense, and then they don't have the players on the back end either. With Jeffrey Okudah being out, with Trufant being out, they don't have the secondary either. So control the front, control the trenches, make sure that there's not unnecessary pressure on Aaron Rodgers, make sure that you're getting decent holes for Jones and Williams, and then let the rest kind of take care of itself, because those guys are going to take care of business, and Detroit doesn't have the linebackers or secondary to compete with anything else. So win up front, and you should win this game. Prediction time, I'm going Packers big. I think they get a double-digit win in this one. I think the Packers are better now, and the Lions are worse than they were earlier than, in this season when the Packers won by 21 in that game. I'm not saying Green Bay's going to win by 21 again, but I just don't think, Detroit is able to pick up a win, and I think Green Bay can win this one relatively easily. I know, Detroit came back and won against Chicago last week. 1, that's Chicago, and 2, I think you always get a little bit of a boost when you hire an interim coach and get some fresh blood and some fresh energy in the room, and then things usually start to kind of just go back to normal. I expect things to go back to normal for Detroit and Green Bay to win big. Thanks for joining me. I appreciate it. Enjoy the game, everyone. I'll be back here tomorrow for an all-new edition of the Pack-A-Day podcast, hopefully on a Victory Monday, recapping a Packers win. Make sure to subscribe if you haven't already. But until next time, and as always, go Pack Go.